Now, in a parliamentary response this week, the Deputy Minister of Defence told the House that a military board of inquiry into casualties sustained by SANDF members in the DRC would begin its work after a complete withdrawal of soldiers from that country. 14 South African soldiers lost their lives in clashes with M23 rebels in the DRC in February of this year. Now, for a discussion on this, I'm joined by Ricardo Teixeira, who's a defence analyst at DefenceWeb. Ricardo, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Minister Holomisa has indicated a military board of inquiry would be launched after the SANDF withdrawal from the DRC. What would such an inquiry look like from a military as well as an accountability standpoint?
Thank you very much for having me. Well, one thing that I want to stress is that if we're going to be doing some sort of board of inquiry, we need to be very careful how it's done. I don't think it will be very clear or unbiased if it came from within SANDF. I mean, at the press briefing recently, the Minister and the Chief of the Defence Force kind of stopped short of doing a victory lap, trying to claim as if there was some sort of success in SAMI DRC and that they had contributed towards peace, when very clearly peace has not been achieved. And I think if there was an inquiry done solely from within SANDF, it would very quickly be classified and not be released publicly. I would like to see some very strong oversight and accountability coming from the Joint Standing Committee on Defence and the Portfolio Committee on Defence and Military Veterans, perhaps in conjunction with a permanently appointed Defence Secretariat who gets given some actual power and some oversight responsibility. And I think a board of inquiry could very easily be something that drags on for years and ultimately leads to nowhere. It needs to be, in my opinion, an expedited but thoughtful process that is conducted properly and efficiently.
And if it is that expedited and thoughtful process, what do you think we would really be able to achieve out of such an inquiry, especially for missions going forward?
Well, one of the first things that we need to uncover and kind of explain where things went wrong is where along the chain of command the mission was approved and someone decided that despite the fact that the annual performance targets are falling short 50% in some places more, that somehow they were going to be able to actually do anything. If you talk to people on the lower level of the command at units, and the higher up you go in the chain of command, eventually at some point someone had to hear that things are not looking good, we're not going to be able to achieve this, and actively made a decision to inform their higher-ups and onward to the president that, hey, we can't technically do it, but we're going to try anyway, and sort of just make a plan along the way. So that seems to be what has occurred. And we need to find out where that happened, who made those decisions, and there needs to be some accountability.
Were the risks underestimated, do you think?
I think the risks were underestimated. There was not only a failure of planning, but also a failure of intelligence. All along the deployment, as M23 was capturing territory and advancing and capturing the high ground around Goma and Sake, intelligence should have picked this up and sounded the alarm a lot earlier on. So there's definitely been some sort of tactical and operational.
So, Ricardo, I mean, you mentioned earlier that we should be careful of biasness if this inquiry is done by the SANDF. There's also talks of a potential Judicial Commission of Inquiry. What's the difference between the two, and is it necessary for us to possibly have both?
I don't think it's necessary to have both. The judicial one would happen outside of SANDF. I would prefer to see a parliamentary inquiry. Personally, there'd be a bit better oversight in that regard. An inquiry, a board of inquiry under SANDF would likely be investigated by members of the Defence Force, and Defence Intelligence would likely classify the document, and it would never become public.
Right.
It would, in my fear is that it would be used to try and cover up some sort of mistakes or hide something that could be perceived as embarrassing under the auspice of national security.
Right. So then what kind of precedent or message does a thorough investigation send, especially given South Africa's peacekeeping role in Africa?
Well, we need to take some serious accountability and behave a little bit more professionally and a bit more serious in this regard. We need to show that, mistakes happen. Yes, firstly, we are all human beings, but that when mistakes happen, we will learn from them and that they should not be repeated. And we've already seen that the mistakes of SAMI DRC are a repeat of some of the mistakes that occurred in Bangui. And that was over 10 years ago. We didn't learn from that. We need to learn this time, and there needs to be some accountability. Someone definitely needs to answer for the failures of this deployment.
I mean, you speak about the failures, and the Deputy Minister, Holomisa, says success or failure in the DRC can't be measured by one incident. How should the broader SADC mission be assessed, and what's your view on South Africa's strategic interests within this region?
I mean, on the broader deployment side, this wasn't the first incident of troops being killed. There were several troops that were killed last year. One was murdered while off duty at a bar. There was a potential fragging and killing of a high-ranking officer, Major Antola Peterse. There were also incidents where the troops were attacked by M23, and there was the UN report that potentially one of our APCs was hit by an anti-tank guided missile. There were several incidents where there were clear indications that, hey, we are not ready for this. And they had to move up, artillery was moved up halfway through the deployment, and then air defense equipment was eventually moved up as well, and then the deployment was extended. There were many decisions that were taken despite the warnings that were on the wall that, hey, something is going to go wrong here. It's not looking good. This hasn't been thought through. And even before the deployment, some alarm was sounded by members of parliament under the previous administration and previous parliament that, hey, we're not ready for this. We're not sending it with the appropriate equipment. Again, it wasn't just one incident, and the repeated or subsequent decisions that we are going to go ahead with this needs to be accounted for.
Speaking of Parliament, Ricardo, I mean, Parliament seems very adamant about full transparency when it comes to this. What are the risks of political interference versus just genuine defense accountability in such situations?
Look, full transparency, I think, is going to be quite difficult to do. There's going to be a level of security classification that is going to come into this. And we need to know, like, at what point, again, did it go wrong? But there needs to be a higher degree of transparency. I think full transparency is going to be difficult. Some things are going to happen in closed doors hearings that are not going to be made public, but there needs to be some level of transparency to restore public trust in the institution.
All right. Ricardo Teixeira, who's a defense analyst at DefenceWeb, thank you so much for your time and your analysis on this inquiry that should be set up for the SANDF's mission in the DRC in the last few months.